A while back I was watching an old video made by Cosmonaut Variety Hour. He's a pretty okay YouTuber, not exactly in my top 10, but he's entertaining if nothing else. I would link you to his YouTube channel, but comparing myself to him, you're probably more so wondering,
who the fuck is Periodic Pete?
Anyway, so about 2 years ago he made a video covering Kingdom Hearts, and within the first 60 seconds of the video, he said this.
The first game is godlike.
I'm sorry?
It's so good. It's one of the best games ever made. It's probably on my top 5 favorite games.
We're still talking about Kingdom Hearts 1, right? That JRPG with limited party options, janky platforming, cramped camera angles when locked onto enemies, a shit ton of X button mashing combat, and very little challenge outside of Proud Mode? That Kingdom Hearts? Okay, maybe I'm being a bit harsh on the game. After all, it has been a while since I last played it. But let's be honest, at its best, it probably ranks only third, maybe second best game in the whole series. And even then, I'd argue that there are better ones out there. And with Kingdom Hearts 3 finally released, I don't think it'll take very long for it to fall even further in those rankings. Don't get me wrong, it's a pretty decent game all things considered, but one of the best ever made? Well, maybe I'm wrong. Might as well check out the rest of the video. And so I did, and he made some pretty good points. But there was something I noticed about his analysis. Almost everything he had to say about the first game was in regards to its story. The only time he even touched on gameplay was a 23-second clip of the video where he only talked about the Riku boss fight before transitioning into talking about Kingdom Hearts 2. I get that the point of the video was to talk about the biggest problem with Kingdom Hearts, that being its story, so it makes sense that he focuses more on the story elements of the games, but he paints the first game as though it's this masterpiece of game design in comparison to the others, and makes it sound like the entire series after that is utter trash, yet doesn't bring up any more of its more glaring issues in gameplay. And more importantly, the fact that the gameplay gradually improved as the series went on. And now that I've gotten as close as I'll get to a proper intro, let's transition into the real topic of this video. Why I think gameplay is more important than narrative in video games. AKA, Pete is just asking for trouble from the RPG communities. Now I'm not saying that story is inferior to gameplay. I don't believe that narrative or story in a video game is unnecessary, or irrelevant, and I certainly don't think that it doesn't matter. I just think that it's less important than gameplay. Now why is that exactly? Well, from personal experience, I can't think of any game that had bad gameplay, but great narrative that still turned out as well as it should have. Most games generally need some form of good gameplay to keep their player going, even if at best it's just subpar. Are you really going to try to convince me that something as monotonous as Metal Gear Survive could be good if it only had a great story? Conversely, I can think of a ton of great games that have good gameplay but tell a pretty mediocre or just bad story. You want an example? Well, besides basically the entirety of the Kingdom Hearts lineup, and every game upon which the video game industry is built, there's this one small gaming franchise, I doubt you've heard of it, called, Super Mario Bros! Mario Kart, Mario 3, Mario 3D World, Mario World, Mario 64, Mario... Literally, the story of most of these titles can be summed up as Bowser kidnaps person or persons of interest, usually Princess Peach, and Mario rescues them by going on an adventure. Sure, games like Galaxy and Odyssey add a little bit of flair to their ending, but it really doesn't evolve beyond that 5-second synopsis, with the only exception being their RPG titles. In fact, while I'm talking about RPGs, I don't think that just because they tend to be more focused on story than other game genres is any indication that story is more important than gameplay. Actually, as someone who used to play a lot of tabletop role-playing games once upon a time, I actually think that RPGs have become more gameplay-focused since their transition into the digital realm, possibly due to the reliance of a more automated experience. But instead of listing examples, let's look at a scenario. You're going to a university, specifically catered to future game designers. You spend most of your semesters learning about things like coding and utilizing professional game design tools, and probably not that many classes that have anything to do with writing a story, but that's besides the point. Anyways, you're finally ready to make your first game. You already have enough of a story written down to work off of, and you have an idea of what you want your gameplay to be like. But now you have to choose which one to prioritize. Do you write your story first and risk dumbing down your gameplay so it can fit within the rules and confines of your world? Or do you prioritize gameplay, but potentially limit your creative possibilities in world building and plot? And at this point, my entire argument could be summed up like so. If you can't play it, it isn't a game. Now please don't think that my previous analogy means at all that I think that you have to sacrifice one in order to make the other good. After all, there are so many games that prove otherwise. But I do believe that it's a wiser decision to prioritize gameplay first and foremost above all else when designing a game. And I'm not objectively wrong in saying that. Ultimately, you can have a game without story, but if you have a story without the game, then it's not a game. It's a movie, and I don't buy movies. I'm not even joking when I say that. If your game is 70% movie, I'm not going to buy it. I'm going to look up the cutscenes on YouTube. Because if your video game is only worth buying for the story and not the gameplay, then why even play it at all when you could just watch it? And for free, no less. But by forgoing what bit of gameplay there is, you're missing out on the full experience. How much of an experience could I possibly be missing out on if there's so little of it in the first place? Besides that, if the gameplay is terrible, how is my experience not worsened by indulging in that terrible gameplay? I'm not saying that I prefer no story at all. Would Dark Souls 3 really be any better if it didn't have any of the lore or story in it? Most likely not, but it could probably still stand on its own even without the story. I'm just saying that gameplay is what matters most in a video game. A game doesn't have to tell a story for it to be good, but it should have good gameplay, and it should have gameplay, period. It just amazes me how many people can react so negatively towards a game just because of a bad story, when there's still so much of everything else that the game has to offer, or when they praise a game only for the story, despite how little good game there is in the first place. As CVH pointed out, story can make or break a game. But honestly, the same could be said for gameplay, if not more so in favor of gameplay. To me, narrative in a video game is like a crutch. It can only help the game. If it can't stand on its own with the gameplay it has, then the story can make that experience, if only a little bit more tolerable. But how far can a game really get when it relies on a crutch like that? On the opposite end of the scale, if the game is capable of walking on its own 2 feet, so to speak, with the gameplay it has, then I don't feel story is really necessary. But it's there if it needs it. And now that I've made the point that I wanted to, I just realized I don't know how to end this video. So how about you tell me one thing you thought I could have improved in this video, or one thing you'd like to see me cover in a future video in the comments below. I'm still trying to figure out what my niche is, or what genre my channel should be about, so I'm game for any suggestions you might have. And please, share this video with someone you know. It helps more than you realize. With all that said, I hope you have an excellent day and stay platinum.